Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 5.52, and in this lesson we're going to introduce the concept of movement within the polysynth. So far we've only been working with the oscillators and with the filters. We haven't actually had those guys move on their own, and although some of our sounds may have a bit of motion to them based on detuning, or if we decide to re-trigger those oscillators to get that little extra transient pop at the start, it doesn't mean that we have any more control beyond that. And with a synthesizer, although it's kind of cool to just make some of these really interesting tones to start, real instruments, acoustic instruments, don't just do that. They all have their own unique envelopes, aka passive motion, to their sounds, okay? Whether that be on the amplitude, so like imagining the y-axis, 0 being silence, 10 being the loudest possible, or on the x-axis, okay, the actual frequency spectrum itself, how are some of our harmonics going to be either hyped or lessened over time? So that's what this is all about, and we have to remember that commercial synthesizers were first invented to specifically emulate real instruments so that studios could get rid of their live players and they could replace them with one synthesizer capable of getting all of those sounds, or at least you could wait until you actually had to do the recording. So synthesizers were really great tools for composers at the beginning, so you could kind of emulate a whole different symphony and write your parts without having to actually have those people there. Technology has changed, it's advanced quite a bit since then, and now we have these really great multi-sampled instruments. So if we want a piano, we can even drop a piano in here, no problem, using the sampler. And then I think we have a piano in here somewhere. So early days of synthesizers, that's what they were kind of meant to do. They were meant to try to emulate this sound. Never could they come as close to something like this, and that's what puts this all into perspective. So today, synthesizers aren't really used to emulate real instruments. Instead, they're used to come up with completely new and original tones to your own work, and in electronic music, that's especially the case. And as you just heard with that piano, it wasn't just a static sound. It wasn't just on, off without any changes happening. And early synth pioneers realized that to be able to emulate some classic instruments, you need to have control over those different planes, over the X plane, over the Y plane, and then we even have additional modulators that can do some other really crazy things that we could never do with real instruments to begin with. So this is just kind of an introduction to our ADSR envelope in the amplitude section, in the filter section, and we're going to go into much greater depth on this. But when we load up our initialized patch, we have this kind of classic gate message. So on, and then I let go off. And our little yellow light indicator, this is going to be important moving forward, shows us how long I'm clicking the key for. So that's just on and off. I can add in additional release so that the sound fades out after I let go. So watch the yellow light when I stop clicking. And we can still hear some stuff happening. And we can compare that to using just, for example, attack and decay, which we've already seen in some of our other synthesizers. It's much different because if I just tap this, the sound just comes on and off because there is no release. But if I hold it down, you can hear we let it play the entire envelope out. Now, sustain is going to dictate where that decay time will sit to. If it doesn't want to go to complete silence, we can use a bit of sustain here, and that kind of sets the overall amplitude loudness, relative loudness in general. Because if I want something that's pretty close to peak value, I could pull this way up. And so we're not fading down too much, but if I pull this way down, like so that then becomes a very, very dynamic instrument, meaning that there's a huge difference between its starting amplitude and its greatest point of amplitude and its finishing point. And with the attack, this is just going to set how long it takes to get to hypothetically the max sustain level, or where our output is set here. So these are all relative to each other. So if I pull this way down and I bring up the attack, we'll hear just how dynamic of an instrument this becomes. And I can even add in some release so that from here we actually will go down to then 0 when I let go of the key. And I'm still holding it, and I let go. So let's pull the sustain up a little bit more, increase the release so we can really hear this, and watch for how long I'm clicking the note down. And then I let go. And it fades out to 0. We're going to talk about all of the nuance to the amplitude envelope and how you have to kind of be careful as to where you set these, because even though we have a percent, this is kind of like an exponential percent. For now, don't worry about that. We'll pull it back up to a gate. So that's the amplitude envelope, but what about the filter envelope? Filter envelope works exactly the same way. We have attack, decay, sustain, release on the filter, and then we just have to set the amount that we want the filter to move by. So if we're on our low pass here and I pull the frequency way down, very, very dull sound here. But what I could do is I could increase the attack and then increase the amount of envelope. And if I pull this all the way up, it will eventually hit to this very top point, and we'll hear that now, before snapping back to its sustain value, which is what this filter frequency is set to, or 110 hertz. If this is just very subtle, we're not going to hear it really brighten up. So we'll do 2 examples of that. Or, so you can hear the difference there. And now we also have a decay, a sustain, and a release. So I'm going to crank this all the way up. And with my decay, I'll set this relatively long. So after it reaches the top point, it's then going to slowly fade back to whatever my sustain value is. We'll pull this up somewhere in the middle. And then if we have release set here, we can also set a release amount on the filter frequency. So from that sustain point, it will then also start to fade back down. So let's take a listen to that here. I just need to make sure that my amplitude release is longer or the same percentage as the release in here. Otherwise, the sound will cut off sooner, all right, than what the amplitude release is setting, which can be a cool effect. So let's take a listen to this. Okay, and you can tell that if we have our filter envelope set and we put an attack on it and our filter is pulled way down, we actually are increasing amplitude as we rise up here, as we add in those additional harmonics. So sometimes you don't even have to do a whole lot of settings in the amplitude envelope if you're just going to be using the filter envelope. And a good example of that is making like the classic plucky type sound. And we'll do that just so you can see it. Really, it's not that fancy. So you can see that we don't have any actual like attack or anything set here, but as I click the note, we are adding additional harmonics and therefore we're adding level, as you can see there. And last but not least, in our movement section in the Polysynth at least, we have LFOs, and we already know what those do. These are our low frequency oscillators, and so these operate below the audible range of human hearing, so from like 0.01 hertz up to about 20 hertz. This one can go up higher than that if you want to apply some audio rate modulation, but I think for our purposes here, we're going to be keeping it in something manageable below 20 hertz. And we could use this to modulate almost anything on the synthesizer. Simply enough, we can modulate the frequency, and you probably already know what this is going to sound like. could sync it to tempo if we want. So we'll turn on the metronome and for 1, 1, right? Like so. We have different shapes in here ranging from a sine wave up to a couple of different saw up, saw down waves, or ramp waves as they're called. And then we also have a sample and hold circuit, which we've talked about so many times in this course already. If you need a review on the LFO, there are entire videos dedicated to that. Okay, so in the next few videos, we're going to start talking about the amplitude envelope, the filter envelope, and how we can use those to our advantages, and some of the nuances and specifics you might want to be aware of. And what I hope you get out of this is that even though pretty much every subtractive synthesizer is going to show these to you in a different way, they all do exactly the same thing. So thank you so much for watching, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson. Take care.